The sound came first, a dry little crack of laughter, low, quick, but sharp enough to cut something in me I thought had already gone numb. Words had drifted through the slats of the wooden gate before it. Why is he even still alive? They weren't shouted. They weren't even meant to be cruel in the obvious way. They were tossed out like a match, casual, careless. But the laugh that followed lit it, and it burned. I stood there, on the other side of the gate, holding a still warm peach pie. Not store-bought, not dressed up with frosting, just the kind of pie you make when you've got time on your hands and you want the house to smell like butter and cinnamon for hours. My wife Evelyn's old recipe. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I pushed the gate open. Inside, the backyard looked almost staged. String lights draped overhead, glowing soft against the twilight. A row of picnic tables lined the grass, each covered in paper plates, sweating plastic cups, and bowls of chips already going stale at the edges. The grill smoked faintly near the fence, the smell of meat layered over citronella candles that worked hard but failed to keep the mosquitoes off ankles. Faces turned, but not to me. I passed them anyway, past the folding chairs, past my son's college friends with their easy laughter, past neighbors I barely recognized. None of them smiled my way. Some were family, some were strangers. None of them looked like they wanted me here. "Oh, Harold." Her voice, the same one from behind the fence, broke through. My daughter-in-law, Natalie. She stood with a paper plate in her hand, her voice carrying that edge of surprise that wasn't surprise at all. "We didn't know you were coming." "I brought dessert," I said. I set the pie down on the long table myself. No one offered to take it. No one even moved their cups aside to make space. I slid it into an empty spot at the end, the foil crinkling under my hand. I found a chair near the far edge of the yard. The metal frame complained when I sat, and my back sent me its own sharp reminder, but I straightened anyway. The music thumped too loud from a speaker set on the deck, fast enough to make conversation stumble, too modern for ears that still favored Sinatra. Laughter rippled through the tables, but none of it carried my name. My son Michael raised his beer high above the crowd. "To family," he called. A dozen glasses lifted in answer, none of them tilted toward me. I pressed my hand against my thigh until I felt the dull ache of nails digging in. I remembered Evelyn's voice, always able to dissolve tension before it thickened. "Smile, Harold. If you don't smile, people don't know where to put you." I tried. My lips wouldn't move. The pie sat in its foil at the corner of the table, the crust cooling into a dull skin. It looked lonely there, like an old guest who didn't understand the new rules. A boy in a backwards baseball cap ran past, nearly clipping my knee with his hot dog. "Sorry," he shouted automatically, the way kids learn to apologize to furniture. Across the table, Natalie's mother spoke with the cheerful precision of someone who had rehearsed her lines. "This turned out just lovely," she said, her manicured hand sweeping out toward the lawn as if she'd arranged the sky itself. "So many memories in this backyard." "Yes," I answered softly, to no one. "There are." Michael moved through the crowd like a man who'd been practicing his warmth for years. A squeeze on the shoulder here, a laugh there. He wore charm like a jacket you slip on before heading out the door. Well-fitted, convincing, but never meant to last the night. "He has my eyes," Evelyn used to say, and it was true. But where mine lingered, his skimmed. He had learned early how to look just long enough to be polite, never long enough to complicate things. From my seat, I could see the maple tree at the corner of the yard. My maple. When Michael was 8, he used to climb those branches until Evelyn called from the porch. 2 feet, Michael. Keep at least 2 feet on the ground." He'd dangle halfway down, one shoe pressed to the bark, the other kicking at the air, grinning with the kind of joy that made me believe we were doing something right. He even gave the lower branches names. Calvin, Coach. I hadn't thought about that in years. Natalie clapped her hands, the silver of her bracelet jingling like little bells. "Quick thing before we cut dessert," she called out, her voice lifting above the chatter. She turned toward Michael, her eyes wide with a rehearsed brightness. Michael stood, smiling. Always smiling. "We've loved this house," he began, and I felt the first shift deep in my chest, like a plate slipping along a fault line. It's been good to us, but we're ready for the next step. The market's strong and, well, we've decided to put it up for sale. Applause cracked across the tables, sharp and bright. A whistle shot up from somewhere near the grill. 2 men clapped him on the back, their voices blending. "Smart move! Upgrade!" Natalie's mother let out a sound that was halfway between a sigh and a purr, satisfaction polished into music. I didn't clap, didn't move. "This place," I said when the noise thinned, my voice low, steady, meant to carry weight without tremor. "It's more than just upkeep." Michael's eyes met mine for half a second, then slid away. "Dad, it's too much maintenance. We're ready for something modern." Upkeep. The word soured in my mouth. Upkeep was the pipe I replaced at midnight one February when the basement filled faster than buckets could empty. Upkeep was the gutters I cleared the week after Evelyn's funeral, my hands raw from cold rain and grief. Upkeep was pruning that maple so it wouldn't lose a branch in a storm and smash through the bedroom window where Michael once stayed up past midnight, whispering multiplication tables to prove he was grown. Natalie's smile thinned into something softer, the kind of smile she used on stray dogs. "Harold, it's not about the past. We just need something newer, more space. You understand, right?" But I did understand. I understood better than anyone here. The past had a smell. Fresh paint when we redid the kitchen in '94. Chlorine from the inflatable pool summers. Murphy's oil soap on the banister Evelyn polished until the wood gleamed like piano keys. The future smelled like paper. Listings, offers, pens pressed too hard against contracts, squeaking across the page to prove they meant it. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. "This week," Michael said, too quick. But today just felt right. Today felt like a performance. Natalie turned her smile back to the crowd. "Dessert!" she called brightly. "We've got cupcakes." Children rushed toward a tray of little cakes, blue frosting piled high like circus tents. No one reached for the pie. "Harold," Natalie said gently, "cupcakes are easier. Less mess." I looked at the pie, cooling like a story no one wanted to hear, and for the first time that evening, I felt my hands start to tremble. If you've been listening this far, I'd love to know where you're from. Drop your city in the comments. It means more than you think to hear it. And if this story is pulling at something inside you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. There are so many stories like this one I want to share with you. The pie sat there, untouched, like a question nobody wanted to answer. I kept my eyes on it because it was safer than looking at anyone else. Safer than watching Michael laugh with a cousin he hadn't seen in years. Safer than seeing Natalie's smile that looked so polished I swore it could cut glass. I'd bake that pie the way Evelyn used to. Slow, deliberate. I could almost hear her scolding me for leaving the lattice uneven, telling me, "It doesn't have to be perfect, Harold. People just have to taste that you cared." But no one would taste it tonight. Instead, the children smeared frosting across their cheeks from Natalie's cupcakes. Blue mouths, sticky fingers, laughter sharp enough to pierce the air. I sat watching, invisible in plain sight. A cousin I barely remembered leaned back in his chair, gesturing with his beer. "Man, selling this place is smart. Prices in Cedar Falls are climbing like crazy. You'll make a killing." "Exactly," Natalie chimed in, her hand brushing Michael's arm with rehearsed intimacy. "It just makes sense to move on while the market's strong." Michael smiled, but it was the kind of smile that had to be held in place, like a picture frame slightly tilted on a wall. I knew my son's expressions too well. He wasn't as steady as he pretended. I cleared my throat. "This isn't just a property," I said quietly. "It's a home." The table stilled for half a second. Then the tide of conversation swept past me, as if I hadn't spoken at all. I leaned back, the metal chair digging into my spine. I could see the garden Evelyn once tended, now swallowed by weeds. She had a way of making life grow. Tomatoes, basil, roses that leaned toward her like she was sunlight. She'd tie her hair up in a red bandana, her hands buried in soil, smiling at me as though it was the most important work in the world. And maybe it was. She used to tell Michael to help her water the plants, pressing the green hose into his little hands while he sprayed half the lawn by accident. He'd laugh until he hiccuped, and she'd laugh with him. And for those moments, the world was unbearably gentle. But none of that showed anymore. Not to them. To everyone here, the backyard was just square footage. A number, a listing. A sudden burst of laughter snapped me back. One of Michael's friends leaned over, clinking his beer bottle against his. "Next stop, some shiny place out in the suburbs, huh? Open floor plan, big kitchen island. You'll be living the dream, Mike." "Yeah," Michael said, but the word caught just slightly. Not enough for them to notice. But I noticed. Natalie filled the silence before it could grow. "We want the kids to have more room, a fresh start. This house, well, it's been good to us, but it's dated, you know?" Her eyes slid toward me as she spoke the last word. Dated. I felt my stomach tighten. Michael avoided my gaze again, his hand tightening around his beer bottle. I looked back at the pie. The foil had gone cold against the table, its edges curling slightly. Forgotten. It wasn't just about the house. It never was. I remember the night Evelyn died. The rain had come hard and sudden, hammering the roof. The gutters clogged fast, spilling water over the edge in sheets. I grabbed the ladder without thinking, climbing up in the storm, my body shaking with exhaustion and grief I couldn't name. My son had sat inside, staring at the floor, lost in his own world of silent anger. Upkeep. That word again. Upkeep wasn't just fixing pipes or climbing ladders. It was shouldering the weight when no one else could. It was tending to the broken pieces of a life that had already started to splinter. And now they called it a burden. Natalie's mother rose, clinking her glass. "To new beginnings," she declared, her smile perfectly rehearsed. "May the next chapter be even brighter than this one." Applause scattered across the tables again. I stayed seated. Michael's eyes flicked toward me, only for a moment. There was something there. A plea, maybe. Or guilt. It vanished before I could name it. I shifted in my chair, my body heavy with years of silence, years of being edged out of the conversations that mattered. Maybe this was how it always ended. The old ways pushed aside, the new taking root like weeds in Evelyn's garden. The pie sat between us, a quiet witness. I leaned forward, my voice rough. "Michael." He froze. The crowd around us dimmed just enough. "Dad, not now." "When then?" My words came sharper than I intended. "When were you going to sit me down man to man and tell me you were selling the house your mother built her life inside?" A hush spread thinly. Forks paused midair. Natalie stepped in, quick, her voice dipped in honey. "Harold, please. Tonight's about celebrating, not dragging things down." "Dragging things down?" I echoed, my chest heavy. "This is my life, my memories, your roots, and you treat it like it's just an address you can swap out." Michael's face hardened, his voice low but firm. "Dad, enough." The conversation around us picked up again. Louder this time, as if to drown me out. Laughter forced, glasses clinking too often. I sat back, the weight of their dismissal pressing harder than any ache in my bones. The pie stayed untouched. That night air grew thicker as the sun dipped fully behind the trees. The string lights glowed brighter against the dark. I sat there, silent, while Michael worked the tables, his smile never slipping, his hand never lingering too long on my shoulder. I thought of Evelyn again, how she used to stand on this very lawn during birthdays, her laugh louder than any speaker. She would have known what to say to Michael. She would have known how to reach him. Me? I was just the old man no one wanted to hear. The pie sat cooling in the dark, its sweetness wasted, and for the first time in years I felt not just alone, but erased. The night carried on as though I hadn't spoken, as though my words had evaporated into the heavy summer air. Laughter swelled again, too sharp, too deliberate, filling the space like insulation against anything real. Forks scraped plates, beers cracked open, and my pie sat at the end of the table, its crust now dull, the fruit beneath sinking into syrup that no one would taste. I stayed where I was, watching, my hands pressed together in my lap. If Evelyn were here, she'd have leaned close, whispering, "Don't let them see you flinch, Harold. You're stronger than that." She always believed that. Stronger than I felt now. The string lights swayed slightly in the evening breeze. The maple tree's shadow stretched long across the lawn, a familiar shape that seemed out of place among the plastic cups and folding chairs. A memory pulled me back. Michael at 12, sitting under that same tree with his math book open, Evelyn beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her voice patient. "Take your time, sweetheart. No one's rushing you." But tonight, everyone rushed to toast, rushed to eat, rushed to pretend the announcement hadn't split the evening in two. I noticed Natalie watching me from across the table. Not openly, but with the sly caution of someone making sure the problem didn't rise again. Her eyes flicked away whenever I looked back, but I knew she was keeping tabs. At one point, she leaned toward Michael, whispering something against his ear. His jaw tightened, his eyes darting in my direction before sliding back to his beer. I felt my chest knot. He hadn't looked at me properly in years, not since Evelyn's funeral. Even then, he'd kept his eyes busy, talking to people about logistics, about flowers, about whether the church parking would be enough. He never sat with me in the silence. He never carried it with me. He let me shoulder it alone. And now, here he was, smiling through another performance, while I sat like a ghost at my own family's table. "Dad?" The voice startled me. Not Michael's. It was Emma, my granddaughter. 11 years old, dark hair that always fell into her face no matter how tightly Natalie pulled it back. She stood near my chair, holding one of those bright blue cupcakes in her hand. Her shirt was streaked with frosting. "Hi, sweet pea," I said, my voice softening. She leaned close. "Is that your pie?" she whispered, nodding toward the untouched foil. I nodded. "It is." "Mom says cupcakes are easier," she said simply, as though repeating a fact from school. But her eyes lingered on the pie. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a paper napkin. "If you want a piece, I'll cut one for you." Emma hesitated, glancing toward her mother across the yard. Then she shook her head, fast. "It's okay," she said before scurrying off, the cupcake leaving a blue trail at the corner of her mouth. I sat back, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. Even my granddaughter had learned which desserts were allowed, which weren't. As the evening wore on, I stood slowly, stretching stiff legs that no one noticed. I moved toward the deck, away from the tables, carrying the ache in my back like another guest. The string lights buzzed faintly overhead, insects clinging to the bulbs. I slipped inside the house. The kitchen greeted me with its familiar creak beneath the floorboards, the counters I'd sanded and stained 30 years ago, the cabinets Evelyn insisted should be painted cream so the space would feel like morning even at night. I touched one of the handles, cool and worn smooth from years of use. My reflection in the dark window stared back. Older, heavier, eyes ringed with the kind of tired that no sleep could fix. From outside, muffled laughter rose again, but it felt far away, as though the house itself kept it at a distance. I opened the drawer by the stove and found the pie server, the same one Evelyn used every Thanksgiving. I held it in my hand, the weight familiar. Then I closed the drawer. "Harold." The voice behind me was low, clipped. I turned. Natalie stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her bracelets catching the kitchen light. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, though her expression betrayed no apology. I wanted to check in." "Check in," I repeated. "Yes, you seemed upset earlier." I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. "Upset? My son announces he's selling the house his mother poured her life into, and I find out standing at a picnic table with strangers. Upset doesn't quite cover it." Natalie's smile held steady, the kind people use in photographs when they don't want their real feelings to show. "It wasn't personal. We just thought it would be easier this way." "Easier for who?" I asked. Her silence was answer enough. She stepped further into the kitchen, lowering her voice. "Look, Harold, I know this place means a lot to you, but it's just too much. The yard, the repairs. Michael can't keep doing it all. He has his own family to think about now. I stared at her. You mean you can't stand it anymore? Her jaw tightened. She didn't deny it. This isn't just wood and nails, I said, my throat tight. It's Evelyn's hands on every corner. It's Michael's childhood pressed into these walls. And you treat it like it's some burden you can toss aside. Natalie's expression softened, but not with kindness. More like pity. Harold, you can't live in the past forever. The words landed like stones. She stepped closer, lowering her voice further. I know this is hard, but don't make it harder for Michael. He's already carrying more than you realize. I wanted to shout, to tell her she had no right to speak for my son, no right to decide which memories mattered and which didn't. But the words caught. I stood there, gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened, the pie server still in my other hand. Natalie's eyes flicked to it, then back to me. Please, let's just get through tonight. Then she turned and walked out, her footsteps light, rehearsed, certain. I stayed in the kitchen long after she was gone, staring at the cabinets Evelyn had painted, the floor we'd laid together, the table where Michael once spilled juice and cried until she kissed him quiet. Outside, laughter roared again. Inside, silence wrapped around me, heavy as grief. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of being a guest in my own home. The kitchen light buzzed above me, faint and steady, while I stood with one hand pressed against the counter and the other still wrapped around that pie server. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. Outside, the laughter rolled like waves crashing against the house. They were out there celebrating, and I was in here trying to keep myself from coming apart. The cabinets Evelyn painted cream seemed to glow softly in the lamplight, carrying her fingerprints still, though she'd been gone nearly a decade. I let my hand run over one, tracing grooves in the wood where the paint had chipped. She always said the imperfections were proof that life had happened here, that a house without scratches or dents wasn't a home at all. I set the pie server back in the drawer carefully, as though putting away a weapon I hadn't meant to draw. Then I heard the door creak open again. Dad? Michael. He stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. The air shifted. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He leaned against the doorway, his arms folded across his chest, beer bottle still in his hand. His face was drawn, his smile gone now that the performance was paused. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked quietly. He sighed, looking down at the bottle. Because I knew you'd take it like this. Like this? My voice caught, harsher than I intended. Like a man who still believes his family's memories mean something. Dad. He shook his head. It's too much house. The roof leaks, the pipes, half of it's falling apart. You think I don't know how much work you've put into this place? But I've got Emma and Luke to think about now. I can't be out here every weekend fixing things, it's not... He broke off, searching for the word. It's not sustainable. I stared at him. You're 39 years old, Michael. When I was your age, I worked double shifts and still came home to fix whatever this place needed. Your mother was sick and I kept it together. Don't talk to me about sustainable. His jaw tightened. You think I don't remember those nights? You patching pipes at 2 a.m, cursing under your breath while Mom lay upstairs coughing? You think that looked heroic to me? I thought it was hell. I thought you were killing yourself for a pile of wood we could have left behind. The words hit harder than I expected. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Your mother loved this house, every corner, every creak in the floor. She believed it was ours, a place where you'd always belong. And she's gone, he said flatly, his voice low. She's been gone almost 10 years. You think I don't miss her? I do, every damn day. But I can't chain my family to her ghost. I can't raise my kids in a shrine. The silence between us thickened. I wanted to tell him that Evelyn wasn't a ghost, that she lived in every nail, every brush stroke, every summer evening with sparklers on the lawn. But he looked at me with those eyes, my eyes, but sharper, guarded. and I realized nothing I said could bring her back for him. "Why today?" I asked finally. "Why make the announcement like that in front of everyone?" Michael's gaze flicked away. Natalie thought it would be easier. "Less dramatic." "Easier for who?" "For you," he said quickly. "No," I whispered. "For her." He didn't deny it. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking suddenly younger, suddenly like the boy who once stood under that maple tree asking if he was big enough to climb higher. "Dad, I don't want this to turn into a fight. We're not throwing you away. We just need a different house, one that works for us." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "And what about me, Michael? Where do I fit in your new house? Your new life?" His face faltered. "You'll always have a place with us." But the way he said it, the quickness, the practiced reassurance, made it sound more like obligation than truth. I turned toward the window. Outside, the maple tree swayed, branches shifting like an old friend waving through glass. My reflection in the pane looked tired, smaller than I remembered myself being. "You don't get it," I said softly. "This house was the last thing your mother and I built together. Selling it isn't just moving, it's erasing, and I can't stand by and clap while you erase her." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Dad, I'm not erasing her. I'm just trying to live." I closed my eyes, Evelyn's laugh echoing faintly in my head. She used to say, "You two are so much alike. You'll either love each other fiercely or fight until you're both bruised." Maybe she was right. I opened my eyes and met his. "If you sell this place," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest, "you're not just selling a house. You're selling the last piece of her we have left." Michael's jaw worked, but no words came. Then, from outside, Natalie's voice called his name, sharp and expectant. He exhaled, turning toward the door. "We'll talk later," he said. But I knew later was a promise that wouldn't be kept. When he left, the kitchen seemed even quieter than before. The pie server still sat in the drawer, the counters still glowed faintly, and I stood alone, wondering when exactly my son had become a stranger to me. Back outside, the party had shifted into its final rhythm. People leaned back in chairs, laughter slurred with alcohol, children chased each other in the dim glow of the string lights. The pie was still untouched, its crust now sinking. I sat again at the edge of the table, watching Michael slip back into his role, laughing too easily, his arm around Natalie's waist. He looked like a man who belonged to everyone but me. A neighbor raised his cup. "To the new chapter." The cheer went up again. I stayed silent. Inside, my ribs ached as though they were counting themselves, one by one, trying to remember what they were holding together. The pie sat cold, its sweetness wasted, and all I could think was, if Evelyn were here, none of this would be happening. By the time I stepped back outside, the air had shifted. The sun had sunk completely, leaving only the string lights and the faint glow from the kitchen window. The laughter out here had turned looser, sloppier. Beer bottles leaned in little clusters across the tables. Kids darted between adult legs, chasing each other with glow sticks, and the smell of burnt charcoal lingered like smoke after fireworks. I took my place at the far edge again. No one noticed. The pie still sat where I'd left it, its crust collapsing into itself, the syrup pooling along the edges. It looked like it was grieving too. Michael had slipped right back into his role, arm snug around Natalie, head bent toward whoever was speaking. From this distance he looked like a man completely at ease, but I knew better. His shoulders were tense. His smile was tight. He was holding it all together for them, not for me. Never for me. I thought of Evelyn then, not in the bright summer memories, but in the quiet winter ones, her breath fogging the glass as she leaned against the window, watching Michael shovel the driveway with more determination than strength. She'd laugh softly and say, "He's stubborn, like you. He'll break his back before he asks for help." And I'd smile because she was right, and because I loved that he had something of mine in him. But sitting there now, watching him across the tables, I wondered if all he'd inherited from me was the distance. A neighbor raised his glass again, his voice booming. "Here's to the big move, the Richards family moving up in the world." Applause broke out again. Cups clinked. Someone whistled. I stayed silent. My chest tightened as I looked at the maple tree swaying just beyond the lights. Its branches stretched upward, silhouetted against the dark sky. For years, it had been Michael's refuge, his kingdom. He used to sit up there for hours with a book or nothing at all, his shoes dangling above the grass. Evelyn used to call out, "Come down before it gets too dark, sweetheart." And he'd groan, bargaining for 5 more minutes like it was the most precious thing in the world. And now he wanted to cut it loose, sell it like furniture. The pressure built inside me, slow at first, then unbearable. I stood before I could stop myself. The chatter dipped. Not all the way, but enough. Enough eyes turned. I cleared my throat, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. This house, this yard, it's not just square footage. It's a life. It's the place your children are standing in right now. The place their mother planted roses. The place your grandfather fixed with his bare hands when it broke. The silence thickened. Even the kids paused mid-run. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Dad." "No." My hand pressed against the back of the chair, knuckles white. "You need to hear this, all of you. You're cheering because my son wants to walk away from the last thing his mother built with him. You clap because you see a smart financial move. But what I see is a graveyard you're paving over with blue cupcakes and empty toasts." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their chair. Natalie's voice cut in, bright and firm. "Harold, that's enough." I turned toward her. "No, it's not enough. It'll never be enough. Because you can't replace 35 years with stainless steel appliances and an open floor plan." Her eyes narrowed, but she kept her smile, brittle as glass. Michael stood slowly, his hand raised as if to calm me. "Dad, please. You're making this harder than it has to be." My chest burned. "Harder? You think this is about hard?" "I buried your mother in the middle of winter, Michael. I came home to an empty bed, to a house that echoed with her absence, and I stayed. I stayed because this house was her, every nail, every floorboard, every damn crack in the plaster, and now you want to erase her like she was just maintenance." The silence after that was heavy, too heavy. Michael's face paled. His lips parted, but no words came. Around us, the guests stared at their plates, at their drinks, anywhere but at me. The tension sat thick in the summer night, buzzing louder than the cicadas. Finally, Natalie clapped her hands lightly, her voice rising above the stillness. "Why don't we get some music going again? Keep the energy up." Laughter returned, forced and sharp. Conversations restarted, louder than before. Someone turned the speaker up, bass thumping until it rattled the table legs. And just like that, I was drowned out again. I sank back into my chair, the weight of 100 stares pressed against me, stares that refused to meet mine. The pie sat untouched. I lowered my eyes to it, whispering under my breath, "You deserve better too." Later, when most of the guests had drifted off, I stayed seated in the dark. The string lights hummed faintly. The maple tree swayed, branches sighing against the sky. Michael busied himself folding chairs, avoiding my gaze. Natalie gathered paper plates with brisk efficiency, her movements sharp. At one point, Emma came back over, her face sticky from frosting, her hands clutching the empty wrapper of a cupcake. She looked at the pie again, then at me. "Grandpa?" she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart. Can we have some tomorrow? Just us?" My throat tightened. I nodded. "Yes, tomorrow." Her eyes lit up briefly before Natalie's voice called her inside. She ran off, leaving me with the promise of one small mercy. But as I sat there in the quiet, I knew tomorrow might never come the way I hoped. By the time the last of the neighbors shuffled down the driveway, the air had gone still. The laughter, the clinking bottles, the applause, all of it had drained away, leaving only the faint hum of insects and the soft snap of the citronella candles burning themselves out. The yard was wreckage now. Paper plates sagging with half-eaten food, cups tipped in the grass, napkins stuck against the fence. The string lights still glowed overhead, too cheerful for the silence they lit. I sat in my chair at the far end of the table, same as I had all night. The pie in front of me had collapsed inward, its crust sinking under the weight of time. It looked abandoned, forgotten. I reached out and touched the foil edge, cold now, my fingertip catching on a jagged crease. Inside the house I heard voices, low, muffled, tense. Michael and Natalie. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm. His deeper voice tight with frustration. Her lighter one, quick, clipped, practiced, back and forth, until the kitchen door swung open. Natalie stepped out first. She carried a trash bag in her hand, tied at the top, her bracelets chiming faintly. She didn't look at me as she crossed the yard to the bins, her movements sharp, efficient, as though clearing debris were a form of punishment. Michael followed a moment later. He stopped near the deck, his hands shoved into his pockets, his head tilted toward the ground. For a long time, he didn't speak. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, his voice low. I kept my eyes on the pie. "Do what?" "Make a scene, in front of everyone. That speech about Mom. It wasn't fair." I let out a breath, rough. "Fair? You blindsided me, Michael. You made an announcement about selling the house your mother loved without telling me first, and you did it in front of strangers. Don't talk to me about fair." He lifted his head, his eyes catching mine across the yard. There was no smile now, no performance, just raw irritation. What was I supposed to do? Sit you down and let you talk me out of it? Let you pile guilt on me until I caved? "Dad, I can't live in this house anymore. I can't keep pretending it's not falling apart, and I can't keep pretending Mom's still here." The words hit like a fist. I swallowed, my throat dry. "I'm not asking you to pretend she's here. I'm asking you not to erase her." Michael shook his head, stepping closer. "You think selling a house erases her? She's not in the wood or the paint, Dad. She's in us. And if we can't carry her without these walls, then maybe we never really carried her at all." I stared at him. His face was tight, his voice steady, but his eyes flickered, betraying something softer underneath. "She loved this place," I said, my voice breaking despite myself. "She made it what it is. She loved us more," he shot back. "And you can't see that because you've buried yourself in memories. You've made this house a tomb, and I can't raise my kids inside a tomb." The silence stretched sharp between us. Behind him, Natalie reappeared, her bag of trash already gone. She placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Come inside, Michael," she said gently, but the gentleness wasn't for me. He hesitated, then turned back to me. "We'll talk later." I wanted to scream, "No, we won't. We never do." But the words stuck in my chest. He followed her inside, the door closing softly behind them. I stayed, alone. The night deepened. The maple tree swayed, its branches brushing each other with the soft sound of whispers. I closed my eyes and let myself drift backward. It was Evelyn's birthday, her 42nd. She'd insisted on celebrating here, in the yard, with nothing fancy. Just burgers on the grill, a lemon cake she baked herself, candles that sputtered in the breeze. She'd worn her red bandana again, her cheeks flushed from laughing at some joke Michael had told. I'd looked at her that night and thought, if this is all life ever gives me, it's enough. Later, after everyone left, we'd stayed outside, just the two of us, sitting in lawn chairs under the string lights. She'd leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "This house feels alive, doesn't it? Like it breathes with us." I'd nodded, not fully understanding then. I do now. A rustle pulled me back to the present. Emma stood near the edge of the deck, barefoot, her hair loose now, her eyes wide in the dim light. "Grandpa?" she whispered. I straightened. "What are you doing out here, sweetheart? It's late." She patted closer, her toes curling against the grass. "I couldn't sleep. Mom and Dad are loud." I swallowed. "Yeah, I heard." She glanced at the pie, then back at me. Can we have some now?" My chest ached. I reached for the foil, peeling it back, the sweet smell rising faintly even now. I cut a piece with the edge of a plastic knife, sliding it onto a paper plate. She sat beside me, legs swinging, and took a bite. Her eyes widened. "It's good," she said around a mouthful, crumbs dotting her lips. "Really good." I smiled, just a little. "It was your grandma's recipe." "Grandma Evelyn?" "Yes." My voice softened. "She used to make it every summer. Said peaches tasted like sunlight if you treated them right." Emma chewed thoughtfully. "I wish I knew her." I felt the sting in my eyes before I could stop it. I looked away, toward the maple swaying against the dark. "You do," I said quietly. "You know her more than you think." She leaned against me then, her small shoulder pressing into mine. And for the first time all evening, I didn't feel completely erased. We sat like that until Natalie's voice called from inside. Emma jumped, wiping her hands on her shirt. "Don't tell Mom," she whispered, and ran off, leaving the plate behind. I picked it up, staring at the crumbs. In the silence that followed, I heard Evelyn's laugh in my memory, faint but real enough to hold on to. And for a moment, I let myself believe she was still here, somewhere in the walls, somewhere in the branches of that maple, somewhere in the crumbs of a pie her granddaughter had just tasted. The morning came gray, flat, as though the sun itself had decided to stay hidden. I woke in the small bedroom off the hall, the one they'd given me after Evelyn's funeral so I wouldn't be alone in the old master. The sheets were stiff, the pillow too soft. I lay there for a long while, staring at the ceiling, listening. The house used to have its own rhythm. Evelyn humming in the kitchen. Michael bounding down the stairs 2 at a time, his backpack half-zipped, yelling that the bus was coming. Even the dog we had back then, Daisy, her nails clicking across the hardwood as she skittered after him. Now, all I heard was muffled movement down the hall, the low murmur of voices, drawers opening, closing, a faucet running, the scrape of utensils in the sink, life happening without me. I rolled out of bed slowly, joints stiff, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I paused, my hand against the wall for balance, tracing the dent near the corner where Michael once rammed his toy truck too hard. Evelyn refused to sand it out. "That's not a flaw," she'd said. "That's a memory." I shuffled into the hall, following the faint smell of coffee. In the kitchen, Natalie stood at the counter, her hair pulled back, her bracelets chiming faintly as she poured cereal into 2 bowls. Emma sat at the table, spoon clutched in her hand, while little Luke banged his against the wood, demanding attention in his 4-year-old way. Michael leaned against the sink, mug in hand, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. The conversation faltered the moment I stepped in. "Morning," I said, my voice rough. Emma perked up immediately. "Hi, Grandpa," she chirped, milk dripping down her chin. Natalie smiled, thin, practiced. "Morning, Harold. There's coffee if you'd like." I poured myself a cup, the pot warm in my hand. I sat at the far end of the table, the same distance I'd kept last night. Michael cleared his throat. "We're heading out later, taking the kids to the park." I nodded, though the words landed like a dismissal. Emma looked between us, chewing thoughtfully. "Can Grandpa come?" Natalie smoothed her daughter's hair. "Not today, honey. Grandpa needs to rest." I set my cup down harder than I meant to. The ceramic clinked against the table. "I don't need to rest," I said. The silence stretched. Natalie busied herself with Luke's spoon. Michael took a slow sip from his mug. Emma frowned. "But he promised pie today." The words hung there, small but sharp. Natalie's smile tightened. "Sweetheart, you had cupcakes last night. You don't need pie this morning." Emma slumped back in her chair, pouting. I met Michael's eyes across the room. For a flicker, I saw something there. Guilt, maybe, or the memory of all the times his mother had stood in this very kitchen telling him yes when the world told him no. Then it was gone. He looked away. After breakfast, the house moved without me. Shoes tied, jackets grabbed, kids herded out the door. Natalie kissed Michael on the cheek, her voice brisk as she listed errands, her keys jingling like wind chimes. I stood by the window as they left, watching Emma glance back just once before Natalie's hand guided her forward. The silence after the door shut was immediate. It wrapped around me like a heavy coat I couldn't shrug off. I walked through the house slowly, each step stirring ghosts. The living room still held Evelyn's touch. The faded rug she'd bought at a yard sale, swearing it had character. The photo frames lining the mantel, dust gathering in their corners. I paused at one. Michael at 10, missing 2 front teeth, grinning with an arm slung around Daisy. Evelyn had written Summer '96 in her neat script along the border. I touched the glass, my reflection blurred with theirs. Upstairs, I wandered into what used to be Michael's room. The posters were long gone, replaced by Emma's dolls and Luke's scattered toy cars. But if I closed my eyes, I could still see it. The glow of a nightlight, the way Evelyn tucked him in, her hand brushing hair from his forehead. She'd hum softly, never words, just a sound that made the walls feel softer. I sat on the edge of the bed now, my hand sinking into the blankets. The sound of the house settling creaked around me. I remembered every repair, every nail, every late-night fix. Not because I loved hammers or pipes, but because Evelyn did. Because she wanted this place to hold. And it had. Until now. By midday, the silence pressed too hard. I went back downstairs, made myself a sandwich I barely tasted, then carried the pie to the table. I cut a piece, the knife sinking through the softened crust, the peaches still sweet despite the chill. I ate it slowly, each bite heavy with memory. I remembered Evelyn in the kitchen, flour dust on her cheeks, shooing me away when I tried to steal a taste. "You'll ruin it," she'd laugh, smacking my hand lightly. Then she'd give me the spoon anyway, smiling like she'd planned it all along. I finished the slice and set the fork down, my throat tight. The pie looked smaller now, but not by much. Too much of it left untouched. Late afternoon brought the sound of the front door again. Michael first, carrying Luke on his hip, the boy's cheeks flushed from the cold. Natalie followed, Emma trailing last, her hair wind-blown, her glow stick still clutched like treasure. They filled the house again, their voices, their footsteps, their laughter. But none of it reached me. Michael caught my eye briefly as he set Luke down. There was something in his look, weary, maybe, or regret, but it passed quickly, replaced with the same mask he'd worn all night before. Natalie brushed past me with a bag of groceries, her perfume sharp in the air. She didn't say a word. Emma lingered near me. She tugged my sleeve. "Grandpa?" "Yes, sweetheart." She lowered her voice. "Did you save me some?" I nodded. "Always." Her smile flickered, quick and secret, before she darted away. That night, after the kids were in bed, the house fell quiet again. I sat at the kitchen table with the pie between my hands, the maple swaying outside the window like a silent witness. Michael passed through once, on his way to the fridge. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then thought better of it. He poured himself a glass of water, glanced at me, then left. I sat there long after he was gone, the pie untouched again. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe the house had become a tomb. Maybe I'd built my whole life inside a memory that no one else wanted to carry anymore. But then I thought of Emma's voice, small and stubborn. "Can we have some tomorrow?" And I knew the past wasn't gone. Not yet. It lived, even if only in crumbs. It was the 3rd day in a row that I woke before the house did. The sky outside the window was a slate gray, heavy with clouds, the kind that pressed low enough to make you feel smaller just standing beneath them. I lay there, listening to the quiet, until the creak of the floorboards announced footsteps down the hall. The smell of coffee followed, the clatter of bowls, Natalie's voice calling the kids. I dressed slowly, pulling on the same worn flannel I'd been wearing the night before. My reflection in the mirror caught me. The deep lines, the eyes dulled by sleepless nights. For a moment I didn't recognize the man staring back. He looked less like me and more like someone Evelyn would have pitied. I made my way down the hall. The kitchen was already alive. Emma chattering about something at school, Luke banging a spoon against the table in rhythm with his sister's words, Natalie moving briskly between counter and sink, and Michael sitting silently, scrolling through his phone. "Morning," I said. A murmur of greetings followed, flat except for Emma's bright, "Hi, Grandpa." She grinned, her mouth ringed with milk. I poured coffee and sat, the chair creaking under me. Natalie slid a plate of toast toward Michael. "I called the realtor yesterday," she said casually. The words landed like a stone in water. Michael nodded, chewing slowly. "Yeah, she said she'll stop by next week." I froze. "Realtor?" Silence spread like a stain. Natalie kept her eyes on her coffee. "Yes, Harold. We're getting the process started. Listings, photos, all of that." I gripped the edge of the table. "You've already decided?" Michael's voice was low. "Dad?" "You stood in front of me the other night and said we'd talk," I snapped, my voice rising before I could stop it. "This isn't talking. This is you selling the ground your mother is buried in while I'm still alive to watch." Emma's eyes widened. Luke went still, his spoon clattering to the table. "Harold," Natalie said sharply, "not in front of the children." "In front of the children?" My voice cracked, years of silence breaking open. "Maybe that's the only way you'll listen. Maybe they deserve to know what you're trying to erase before it's gone." Michael pushed his phone aside, his face tight. "Dad, enough." "No, not enough," I said, slamming my hand against the table. The cups rattled. "You think this is about pipes and gutters, about market value? This is about the woman who carried you inside these walls, about every night she stayed up rocking you through fevers, every birthday she decorated this yard until her hands ached, and you sit there and call it too much upkeep?" Emma's lip trembled. She looked from me to her father, her eyes filling. Michael stood, his chair scraping back hard. "Stop it, Dad. Just stop. You're not the only one who lost her. You don't get to weaponize Mom's memory every time you don't like my choices." The words cut through me, but I couldn't stop. The dam had broken. "I'm not weaponizing anything. I'm begging you to see what you're throwing away. You think your mother would have wanted her grandchildren raised in some soulless box with shiny countertops and no history? You think she'd clap for you while you erased her?" Natalie's voice snapped like glass breaking. "That's enough, Harold." The room stilled. Emma buried her face in her hands, muffled sobs slipping through her fingers. Luke whimpered, confused. Michael's face flushed, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get to use them like this. Not Emma, not Luke. This is between us." I shook my head, my voice trembling now. "No, Michael, it's not just between us. They're the ones who will grow up without her stories, without the roots she planted. And you're letting it happen." His eyes burned into mine, anger and grief warring behind them. For a moment I thought he'd shout. Or worse. But instead he turned to Natalie. "Take the kids upstairs." She didn't hesitate. She gathered Luke into her arms, guided Emma by the shoulder. Emma looked back at me, her face wet, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak. Then she was gone, swallowed by the stairs. The silence they left behind was thick, suffocating. Michael and I stood across the table from each other, the pie, what was left of it, sitting between us like a witness. "You can hate me for this," he said finally, his voice low, shaking. "But I can't live your life. I can't carry this house on my back the way you did. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you never really understood me." The words lodged deep. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He turned, his shoulders rigid, and walked out the back door. The screen slammed shut behind him. I stood there alone, the kitchen thick with the echoes of what had just happened. The pie sat in the center of the table, untouched again. I lowered myself into the chair, my hands trembling, my chest tight. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe Michael was right. Maybe I didn't understand him anymore. Maybe I never had. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the gentle kind of silence Evelyn used to weave with her presence. It was the brittle kind, the kind that snapped if you breathed too loud. Michael hadn't come back inside after slamming the screen door. I'd heard his footsteps pacing in the yard for nearly an hour before they faded down the street. Natalie stayed upstairs with the children, her voice floating down every so often, low and steady, the kind of tone people use to smooth panic. I sat at the kitchen table until the coffee went cold, until the pie caved in on itself completely, until the light outside thinned into gray again. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Eventually, I forced myself up. The floorboards complained under my weight, each groan sounding like the house itself resenting me. I wandered through the rooms as if I were a stranger. The living room felt smaller than it used to. The rug Evelyn bought, the mantel crowded with photos, the couch sagging where she'd spent winter evenings knitting. It all looked dim under the morning light, like it belonged to someone else's story. I paused at the mantel, picking up one frame. Michael, age 7, missing his front teeth, grinning so wide his whole face seemed to laugh. Evelyn's arm wrapped around him, her cheek pressed to his hair. Her eyes had that spark that always made me feel like we were in on some private joke no one else knew. My thumb brushed over the glass. For a moment, I almost heard her laugh, the kind that could break open the darkest night. But the sound dissolved before it reached me. I set the frame back down carefully, as though any sudden movement might shatter more than glass. Upstairs, the hallway smelled faintly of lavender from Natalie's candles. I paused outside the door to what used to be our bedroom. They'd turned it into a guest room years ago, after Evelyn passed. I hadn't stepped inside since. I pushed the door open. The walls were bare now, painted a pale gray that meant nothing to me. The bed was smaller, the dresser gone. But I could still see her. Evelyn propped against the pillows with her book, her hair tucked behind her ears, her smile tired but always ready when I walked in. I could still hear the way she'd call out, "Don't turn on the light, Harold. I'm almost done with this chapter." Her voice soft in the dark. I closed the door quickly, before the memory could hollow me out completely. By late afternoon, Michael returned. His steps were heavy, his face drawn. He didn't look at me as he crossed the kitchen. He grabbed a bottle of water, muttered something to Natalie, and went upstairs without a word. Natalie glanced at me once. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, but she said nothing either. She just turned back to the groceries she was unpacking. The silence between us was louder than any argument. The next day, the realtor arrived. Her car pulled into the driveway mid-morning, its engine humming too new, too polished. She stepped out in heels that didn't belong on this street, a bright folder clutched against her chest. Her smile was practiced, confident. Natalie greeted her at the door, her voice sugar-sweet. "Thank you for coming. We're so excited to get started." Michael hovered behind her, his face set, his hand tight around his coffee mug. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching. The realtor's eyes swept the entryway, the walls, the staircase Evelyn had polished with Murphy's oil soap until it gleamed. "It's got great bones," she said brightly. Great bones. I felt the words cut through me. This wasn't a home to her. It was inventory, numbers, a line on a listing. Natalie gestured for her to follow. "Let me show you the kitchen. We had some updates done." Her voice faded as they moved down the hall. I stayed frozen, my hand on the banister, my chest tight. I wandered outside. The maple tree stood tall, its branches shifting in the breeze. I placed my hand against the bark, rough beneath my palm. I remembered Michael at 10, climbing high until Evelyn called him down, her voice full of laughter. I remembered him at 16, sitting in the crook of its branches after his first heartbreak, his eyes red, his voice breaking as he told me he didn't understand how people could leave so easily. I'd stood beneath him then, not knowing what to say, just waiting until he came down on his own. Now, he was leaving anyway. I pressed my forehead against the trunk, the bark biting into my skin. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was speaking to. Evelyn, Michael, the tree itself. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves like an answer I couldn't understand. Later, when the realtor finally left, her heels clicking down the walkway, I found myself back at the table. The pie was nearly gone now. Emma had snuck more pieces when she could, her secret smile softening me each time. Only a sliver remained, the crust flaking into crumbs. Emma came into the kitchen quietly, sliding into the chair beside me. She looked at the pie, then at me. "Are you sad?" she asked. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Yes," I admitted. She nodded, serious. "Me too. I don't want to move." My throat tightened. I reached for her hand, small and warm in mine. "Your grandma didn't either," I said softly. She loved this place, more than anything. Emma leaned against me, her head pressing into my arm. Then we'll remember for her, she whispered. I closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I let the tears come. Quiet, steady, falling into her hair. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the house again, room by room, touching walls, doors, windows, saying goodbye without saying it aloud. When I reached the kitchen, I sat at the table and pulled the pie plate toward me. The last piece waited there, sagging under its own sweetness. I picked up the fork and ate slowly, savoring every bite like a prayer. When the plate was empty, I set it down and whispered into the silence, "Thank you, Evelyn." The house didn't answer, but the walls felt warmer. The sign went up faster than I thought it would. By the time the realtor came back with her clipboard and her polished smile, I already knew what was coming. Still, seeing that post hammered into the front yard sent a hollow crack through me I wasn't prepared for. For sale. 2 words. Red, white, and blue. Neat lettering. Final. I stood at the window in the living room, the curtain pulled back slightly, watching her push the last nail into the post. She dusted off her hands and smiled at Natalie, who hovered nearby, arms crossed as if staking claim to her victory. Michael stood beside her, his shoulders tight, his eyes fixed anywhere but the sign. I wanted to tear it down, rip the post from the ground with my bare hands, but instead I just let the curtain fall back into place. Behind me, the room felt smaller. Evelyn's rug, Evelyn's mantle, Evelyn's laughter still echoing faintly in the walls. And now this house was just a commodity, a listing. That night, the realtor took photos, wide-angle shots of the kitchen Evelyn painted cream, of the banister she polished, of the maple tree swaying out back like it belonged to a catalog instead of a family. I watched from the corner, silent. My reflection slipped into frame once or twice, and she asked me kindly to step aside, as if I were clutter, as if I didn't belong in my own home. Michael kept his eyes down. Natalie fussed over details, fluffing pillows, straightening chairs, hiding clutter in closets. She looked like she'd been waiting years for this moment. Emma watched too, her small face pinched. She sidled up beside me at one point, whispering, "It feels weird, doesn't it?" "Yes," I said softly. "It feels very weird." She slipped her hand into mine. We stood like that until Natalie called her away. The days blurred. Calls came. Strangers walked through, their voices carrying from room to room. "It's spacious. Needs updates. Good bones." Every word felt like another nail driven in. I stayed out of the way mostly, retreating to the back porch, the maple shading me like an old friend. But every time I heard those voices drift through the walls, I wanted to shout. This isn't just square footage. This isn't just good bones. This is Evelyn. But I didn't shout, not anymore. My voice had cost me too much already. One evening, after the last strangers left and the door closed behind them, I found Michael alone in the kitchen. He sat at the table, his head in his hands, the glow of the overhead light casting long shadows across the counter. I stood in the doorway. "You look tired." He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red. "I am." I stepped in, pulling out a chair. The scrape of the metal legs against the tile sounded too loud. I sat across from him, the space between us heavy. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "I was hard on you the other morning, maybe too hard." Michael exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "You weren't wrong." That caught me off guard. He rubbed his forehead. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time, Dad. I try to do what's best for my family, but it feels like whatever I choose, someone loses. If I keep this house, I lose Natalie. If I sell it, I lose you." My throat tightened. "You'll never lose me." He met my eyes then, his own wet. "Haven't I already?" The words hit deep, because part of me knew they were true. I reached across the table, my hand finding his. His skin was warm, trembling slightly. "You remind me of her, you know. Not just in your smile, but in the way you carry too much and don't let anyone see it." She'd be proud of you, Michael, even if I don't always say it. He looked away, blinking hard. His jaw clenched, but his grip tightened around mine. For the first time in years, we sat there not as adversaries, but as two men broken by the same loss. Later that night, Emma crept into the living room where I sat staring at the for-sale flyer left on the counter. She climbed onto the couch beside me, her knees tucked under her chin. "Grandpa?" "Yes, sweetheart. When we move, can you still tell me stories about Grandma? Like the one about the peach pie and the one about the maple tree?" I turned to her, my eyes stinging. "Yes," I said softly. "Every story I have." She nodded, satisfied, and rested her head against my arm. For the first time since Evelyn passed, I felt something like peace. Not because the house would stay, it wouldn't, but because her memory had already moved where it mattered, into Emma. The day the sign turned to under contract, I stood under the maple one last time, my hand pressed to its bark, rough and steady. "I did what I could," I whispered. "The rest is theirs now." The wind stirred the leaves, rustling softly, almost like Evelyn's laugh. I smiled faintly. "I'll carry you. Don't worry about that." On the last night before the move, the pie was gone. Every crumb. Emma had insisted we finish it together, just the two of us, in the quiet of the kitchen. We ate with forks straight from the dish, laughing when the crust crumbled, sharing memories she'd never lived but claimed anyway. When she leaned against me afterward and said, "Grandma would have liked me, huh?" I felt Evelyn so close I almost answered her out loud. "She would have loved you," I whispered, "more than you'll ever know. The house is leaving us, but Evelyn isn't. She's in every laugh Emma lets slip, in every stubborn line on Michael's face, in every crumb of pie that tastes like sunlight. The sign out front can say sold, the walls can belong to strangers, but she's not theirs. She's ours." And that finally was enough.